A background on what I did over the summer. So I did a literature review. The articles were provided by my mentor because this is she's a grad student and this is what she's one of her research projects also. So she was able to provide me the article that she had. And the question I was looking into is how to increase the representation of underrepresented groups in the cybersecurity sector and design applications that protect the privacy of all users. So a little bit of introduction. The digital technology era that we live in has truly revolutionized the way we live. 85% of Americans are online on a daily basis. Over 3/4 of Americans shop online, and the majority of those American online shoppers make more than one online purchase a month. And because such a substantial fraction of the American population is surfing the web and making online purchases, it's important that Americans are aware of the cybersecurity threats that they may encounter and how to protect themselves against those malicious actors who try to steal information like social security numbers, credit card information, etc. And another thing that I've included here that my mentor was actually she was looking into the intersectionality of how people with disabilities and other identities struggle to learn about cybersecurity and enter this workforce. So I think that a lot of the things that get looked over are people with visual impairments. So there are assistive technologies that are supposed to help people with visual impairments, but they kind of disregard their privacy and security concerns. So even if it is the intention is well, it doesn't really consider that the privacy and security concerns of those people, because people with visual impairments are also underrepresented when it comes to creating these types of applications. So the review of literature. So the causes of the underrepresentation of groups in cybersecurity, I'm going to present the findings of a research article that uses social cognitive research to basically understand why people why people show interest in a career or actually pursue it. But I'll start off with the stats. So women and people of color are underrepresented in the cybersecurity workforce. I have included here some stats. I'm not going to read all of them to get through all of this in time. But yeah, women make up only 1/4 of the cybersecurity workforce, despite making up half of the US workforce. And that's really interesting to see how large that disparity is right there. And you see that again with Hispanic and African Americans who represent a larger percent in the workforce, but when you look at their participation in the cybersecurity sector, it's much lower. So in order to get people to target underrepresented groups, to encourage them to pursue a cybersecurity profession, one of the research items is basically what sparks someone's interest in the cybersecurity profession. And this article here from Chai et al. Basically uses social cognitive research and to try to understand that. And basically, one's perceived career self-efficacy is positively correlated with an interest in a cybersecurity career and positive career outcome expectation. But also, college women reported that limited education, family, and societal concerns are barriers that they perceive when pursuing these types of careers. And this impacts women's self-efficacy, and that's why you see that type of underrepresentation in cybersecurity. Another thing is that a cybersecurity related education positively impacts a student's perceived self-efficacy, career interest, and outcome expectation. But because the quality of education is usually correlated with one's socioeconomic status, you see that people of color and low income groups don't usually have that access to that type of education, that cybersecurity education that sparks their interest. So how do we support learners from these underrepresented groups? One of the research articles I read basically looks at this cybersecurity camp. It's a free 5-day camp sponsored by the National Science Foundation and NSA. And AMO's study gathered data from 34 Gen Cyber campers aged 13 to 17, of which 10 were girls. And again, you see here that girls make up a smaller percent of those campers in this cybersecurity camp. And to measure their self-efficacy, the campers completed the Cybersecurity Engagement and Self-Efficacy Scale, SES, to measure their cybersecurity engagement and self-efficacy 3 times during the duration of the camp, on the first day of the camp, at the end of the 4th day of the camp, and after the final day of camp. Greater scores on the SES indicate greater cybersecurity engagement and self-efficacy. And what the findings from this study, this article reveal, is that at the beginning, at the beginning of the first day of the camp, you can see the disparities here. Male students on the right side, and you can see their level of their level of self-efficacy, and you can see that this bar is much wider and much higher than the one for girls, which is much more clustered. But by the end of the camp, you see that the type of statistical significant difference in their self-efficacy prior to the participation in Gen Cyber is reduced to a point where the girls catch up to the same self-efficacy levels of the boys after camp. But one of the limitations and from this article is that the sample size is small, but it only looks into a 5-day camp. You don't really see if the girls continue to always feel that same way after they participate in college courses. So you can't so even if the self-efficacy was those levels were able to reach the same, you can't really tell if that continued to stay the same as these girls approach higher education and career. So another thing is that because a lot of the underrepresented groups are people who are first-generation college students and low income, it's sometimes difficult for them to navigate the institutional systems. So things such for meeting the major requirements or even knowing about the career. So one of the research articles I also read creates a cross-institution collaboration between research institutions or nonprofit organizations and a school district. And basically the theory here is that creating a cross-institutional computer information system pathway is going to facilitate and maintain access to cybersecurity careers for underrepresented students. And another important thing about the way that they designed this pathway is that it focuses on CIS, computer information systems, rather than CS courses, because computer information system is a much more career-focused trajectory, because computer science is just such a broad thing that you probably wouldn't, there are just so many careers. And so by narrowing it down to a specific section within CS, you're able to lead students to that pathway. And again, here, the research practice partnership consisted of a majority Latinx K-12 district, a Hispanic serving community college, a nonprofit organization that helps Latinx youth pursue jobs in tech, and a nonprofit research organization. So all of these organizations work together to create this pathway. And so how they collected in data from this project, this research practice partnership, is by interviewing counselors, faculty, teachers, and students to understand why students chose the CIS pathway, who stays on throughout the pathway, and what services and supports are useful. And also the data that was collected between meetings among the institutions, the leaders of those institutions, was used to make sure that the institutions are able to work with each other successfully. Yeah, so to make sure, so it's so just as how it's important to create that pathway, it's also important to make sure that the institutions are able to communicate and work together to create that pathway. And so the takeaways from that research article were that with students with different strengths in this particular school district are drawn to CIS classes when these classes highlight the opportunity to be creative and get hands-on learning and increase the self-efficacy of students so that they feel that they have the skills to succeed in the course and thus are more likely to take CIS classes. So basically targeting all sorts of students. Yeah, so like to battle like any stereotypes that there might be about people, like if people who are better at math might be more suited for those classes, try to battle those stereotypes. And perceived career self-efficacy is positively correlated with an interest in a cybersecurity career. And it's supported by Green et al.'s findings because students were more likely to take a CIS course and develop an interest in computer information systems when their self-efficacy was increased. And the positive correlation between cybersecurity education and self-efficacy shows that once a student acquires CIS education through courses, the student will develop greater self-efficacy, interest in CS, and a positive career outcome expectation. Another demographic that is underrepresented and understudied are multilingual learners. So the current state of the CS for All movement neglects multilingual learners, particularly because of the notion that multilingual learners need to become fluent in English in order to grasp the STEM-related content. And another research article aims at creating a justice-centered CS education framework in order to help multilingual learners access CS education. And some of their design principles include contextualizing computational thinking concepts around relevant and everyday situations. So that means including when you're creating lessons for CS to include things that are like in the particular research example that they included in the research paper, they used this cartoon character that children were familiar with, and that's how they were able to engage students, because they were able to recognize that cartoon. So that's what they mean by contextualizing computational thinking concepts around relevant and everyday situations. There are other design principles here, so allowing multilingual students to exercise and apply computational thinking concepts and practices outside of school setting, and encouraging students to communicate with nonverbal communication, because multilingual learners usually don't have high acquisition of English yet. And the final design principle was to create a coherent curriculum that effectively builds on multilingual students' prior knowledge of computational thinking concepts. And what they did here was they found a pre-service teacher, which is just a teacher that is in training to become a teacher. And they worked with the district CS coach to make planning lessons. And then after, the researchers gathered video recordings of the pre-service teacher giving the lesson materials, debrief sessions, and written reflections from the teacher. And the takeaways from this article were that multilingual learners do not need great English acquisition to learn computational thinking concepts through the incorporation of these 3 design principles developed by the researchers into the curriculum, and that contextualizing computational thinking concepts within a familiar context, such as the use of a popular reference, engage multilingual learners and promote a greater understanding of the concepts. Allowing multilingual students to communicate through a combination of gestures and verbal communication encourages multilingual learners to participate and acquire new computational thinking vocabulary, and providing multiple ways of demonstrating comprehension of the concepts. So moving away from assessments, grades, and scores, as well as providing instruction for multilingual students to go beyond the minimum expectations, such as giving them like thinking exercises that they can apply outside in the real world. And the third design principle of a coherent sequence of computational thinking lessons was not really investigated because the pre-service teacher only implemented 1 lesson. So that's a limitation of this research article. They weren't able to create a coherent sequence of lessons, and only 1 of them was tested. So finally, the concerns of visually impaired individuals about camera-based assistive technology. So the development of assistive technology has the potential to improve the quality of life for visually impaired individuals. However, individuals who utilize camera-based assistive technologies have privacy and security concerns because they may unknowingly share information that threatens their security or information that they're not comfortable disclosing. So Actor et al. Basically research looks into what those concerns are. And they gathered data for this study by emailing members of national blind organizations, and 155 visually impaired people completed the survey. The survey consisted of questions of the comfort level of using camera-based assistive technologies, with one of 3 types of human assistance being investigated in all scenarios. So the scenarios were home, office, and restaurants, and the 3 types of human assistants were family, friends, and then crowd workers, which are just people who are working as people who are working on websites that provide services that for visually impaired people. So if some of a visually impaired person needs to make sure that they're using the right medication, they can hop onto the website that offers a service and just turn on their camera to show their prescription bottle. But then that also goes into like how those privacy and security concerns, because they don't know if they might have their credit card in the background or other private and information. So the survey questions asked participants about their level of comfort asking a type of human assistant about a foreground object through an image, and their level of comfort with certain background objects in the image on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 meaning extremely uncomfortable and 5 meaning very comfortable. The third question asked participants to explain their choices, and these 3 questions were asked for all 3 scenarios: home, office, and restaurants. And the analysis was conducted through non-parametric statistical tests for the mean scores on each type of questions to create 95% confidence intervals. And the findings show that visually impaired people feel more comfortable with capturing general objects. So things like clothes, writing utensils, all of just general objects, than personally identifiable information, which is naturally makes sense for camera-based assistive technology, and are more comfortable capturing their laptop screens compared to objects that may affect impression. So objects that may affect impression just tend to relate like things that like how disorderly the background is. And the participants are least comfortable sharing personally identifiable information with crowd workers and with family members and friends, but are less comfortable sharing information that affects impression with friends than family members and crowd workers. So if those things kind of flipped up right there, depending on the object that was in the foreground. Another finding was that female participants feel less comfortable than male participants in sharing information with human assistants. Participants who are not blind so people who are like legally blind or partially blind have more concerns about disclosing personally identifiable information than participants who are completely blind, because completely blind people have gotten to the point where they just believe that they have to kind of accept that violation of privacy in order to go through their daily routine. And although visually impaired people tend to trust their family members more, they don't want to be perceived as a burden, and that's when they start relying on those websites that provide those services. And some participants trusted paid crowd workers more than volunteers, whereas previous work suggested the contrary, that people would trust volunteers more because volunteers are perceived to assist the visually impaired for altruistic reasons. And the reason people trusted paid crowd workers more is because they are trained and professionals, whereas volunteers are not trained. And also paid crowd workers also kind of have this contract where they can't disclose, like they have to maintain the privacy of the person they're assisting, and that just doesn't really happen with volunteers. And so the conclusions here are that considerations of people with different needs when creating applications, especially assistive technology. And that just comes with being more inclusive and diverse in the workforce, so that you're able to capture the opinions, thoughts, and experiences of different kind of people to create applications that take those considerations. I didn't get to the information security training and education, but that was just another thing I had there. Another thing is that supporting learners with language barriers and lack of knowledge in navigating college and career is also important to helping bridge that gap. And that increasing cybersecurity camps to introduce adolescents and children to cybersecurity is also important, because as we saw with the girls, it really improved their self-efficacy, and overall for all participants, it increased their self-efficacy, but it really helped to bridge that difference that we saw prior to the participation in the camp. And the acknowledgement would be to Samantha Catcher, who is my mentor. She's a grad student. So if there's that. And this thank you for listening.